You. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Gabriella Gallagher, National Chief of Canadian Friends of Peace Now. Our organization is a Canadian partner to Peace Now, Shalom Achav, which is Israel's leading peace movement and which promotes the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You can find out more about us on our website, peacenowcanada.org. We really hope you will consider supporting us with a donation, which you can do via our website. Just go to the donate page. We rely entirely on donations from people like you. Later on, we'll have time for audience questions. Please type in your question at any time using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Please make your question as concise as you can. Our webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website. Our moderator today is Jacqueline Swartz, a longtime board member of our Toronto chapter. Jacqueline, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce our speaker.
All right, thanks, Gabriella. Just a really brief rundown of Eric Alterman's mile-long resume. He's extremely well qualified to discuss the U.S.-Israel relationship, having recently published a comprehensive book on the subject called We Are Not One, and we encourage you to get it. The History of America's Fight Over Israel. He's an award-winning writer of 11 books, other books, a journalist with a wide body of acclaimed work to his name, and a CUNY Distinguished Professor of English and Journalism at Brooklyn College. So he was also the liberal media columnist for The Nation for 25 years, and now is the columnist for American Prospect. He has been a columnist for The Guardian, The Forward, MSNBC, and Rolling Stone. I understand he's a Bruce Springsteen expert. And a
buy that book too.
What?
People can buy that book too.
Oh, what's the name of that book?
It Ain't No Sin to Be Glad You're Alive.
Great, highly recommended. He's a contributor to The New Yorker and Atlantic. So I will stop there. If I could go on, and first ask you, what prompted you to write this current book?
Oh, thanks for having me, everyone. Thanks for being here. There's a few answers to that question. The first one is that I actually began the book literally 40 years ago when I was in college and I had to write an honors thesis. And I was angry. I went to Israel for a semester my sophomore year. And I came back. Now it's more than 4 years ago, I'm sad to say. And I came back and I wanted to be a New York Jewish intellectual. And I had discovered that the tradition of New York Jewish intellectuals had been hijacked by neoconservatives. And so I decided I like to understand things historically. So I started to trace the history of these people, the neoconservatives, and I identified it mostly correctly, but not entirely, with the 1967 war, when Israel became number one, the most important thing in the world to almost all American Jews. But number two, it switched from being David to being Goliath in the battle with what had been the Arab world, but now became with the Palestinians. And I tracked the change in their views on other issues, particularly the Vietnam War, to show how doves became hawks, in my view, as a result of Israel's changing position. So that was in 1981, 82. Then 10 years later, I was getting my doctorate, and I thought I would go back to this and do the same kind of study on the founding of the state of Israel. What did it have? What effect did it have on American liberals and American liberal intellectuals? And I spent a year on that, and then I gave up on it because Jews write too much. When you write a doctorate, the thing you're doing really is just showing you've read absolutely everything about your topic. You're not supposed to say anything too exciting. because then people will disagree with you. You won't get your PhD. And there's just too much damn stuff written by Jews about Jews. So I couldn't be comprehensive, but I saved all my notes. In fact, I even saved my notes from 40 years ago on little index cards. That's what a nerd I am. And so this issue of Israel became, once I became a professional, something that was like gnawing at me my whole adult life. I wrote many, many columns about it. And I felt like American US policy was driven in large part by the media and by the role of American Jews in their organization. So I thought I'd tell the story. Now, the other major reason I did it is because over the years, I found it increasingly difficult to discuss the issue with anyone, because I noticed that, at least in the United States, the issue is not an issue of difference like climate change. It's an issue of absolute identity. It's been one for American Jews, as I said, since '67, but it's now become one for people who want to get rid of Israel too, or don't like Israel. And people can't talk to each other about it. They just get angry unless they agree exactly on their assumptions. So I thought it would be useful to just have the facts, the arguments and the facts together with them, and then people could argue. But if they really wanted to know what exactly they were arguing about, I would have provided that. So the book is a little over 500 pages, but 60 pages of those are footnotes and evidence and so forth.
Okay, great, thank you. What has changed in the relationship? What changed after October 7th? And before that, what was the big, I assume this is a turning point. Before that, what was the other major turning point?
I don't think actually all that much has changed. I think what's happened is that people have become more intense about their positions, and their positions feel more vital to them, and more central to the ways they're living their lives and participating in politics. But I think the people, see, here's the thing, myself included, most people in America, certainly most Jews, grew up with myths about the founding of the State of Israel and the behavior of the State of Israel. And I embraced many of these myths, even as I associated myself with liberal Zionism, and I hated Netanyahu and so forth. But when I wrote the book, I learned a lot of things that disturbed me that I didn't know. And those myths are now, for instance, no longer a secret, because there's a very large, particularly on social media, presence of anti-Zionists. I don't really like to use the word Zionist in this way. I think Zionism is a settled issue. There's an Israel, that's that. But it's the way people talk about it, so I'll do it today. So people have reacted in two ways to this, by and large. One is to double down on this mythical Israel that has done no wrong, has always just wanted to make peace with the Arabs, and is the most moral army in the world, and is isolated and about to and always in danger, and the only democracy in the Middle East. And then the other side is people say, hey, wait a minute, I've been lied to my whole life, and I'm very angry about this, and Israel is terrible, and it needs to be gotten rid of somehow, although these people have no idea actually how it would be gotten rid of. And I need to demonstrate that at every chance I get. So these two people, again, are people who can't talk to each other, who just think the other side is the enemy.
Is there an age difference between those people?
Well, yeah, I mean, the second group is a lot younger. The first group is very much a product of Holocaust education. There are not that many survivors of the Holocaust, but there's a lot of grandchildren of survivors. Well, no, I'm not actually, but I'm that age. I didn't lose any close family in the Holocaust. My family left Europe after World War I. But people have, it's interesting, it's a slightly side issue, but Jews didn't talk about the Holocaust. There was no even word Holocaust for a long time and survivors didn't talk about the Holocaust to their children, but they did talk about it to their grandchildren. And it became something that people talked about in the 1960s, very rarely in the 1950s. In fact, Israel was not really something people talked about very much in America in the 1950s, after an enormous effort that went into helping to found it. So older people are very much imbued with the idea of Israel rising from the ashes of the Holocaust and creating this miracle in the Middle East, where the deserts bloom and these new Jews wiped away all the shame of Jewish history and the weakness and the unmanliness of it. Whereas younger Jews have a few important differences. One is that the Israel they've been taught about is not the Israel that exists, because that Israel is not occupied other people and conduct human rights violations and lie to the media. But also they've found that this heroic, first of all, the Holocaust is not nearly as powerful a story as it was 40 years ago. There have been other genocides. But second of all, it's more distant. It's a part of ancient history for them. And so is the heroic founding of the State of Israel, which had a lot of problems with it, but there was also a great deal of genuine heroism involved. And so they've got a completely different story in their heads. And they are pissed off, many of the particularly young people, of being lied to by their parents, by their grandparents, by their Hebrew school teachers, etc. And this is why one reason the battle on college campuses is so intense, because it's when they go to college that they learn, and most American Jews go to college, they learn that the story that myths that they've been handed are false. And older American Jews who contribute to American Jewish organizations like AIPAC and ADL, they're furious at what their kids are learning in college, true or not. That's why so many of them, including the head of the ADL, says that all anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, period. Because these kids,
I'm going to get, you're answering like all my questions.
Yeah, all right.
So
everything's related to everything in this topic.
That's true. And we will get to, I really want to get to that as a distinct question. But right now I want to ask you about the key tension points vis-a-vis the Gaza war and the day after between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu coalition.
Well, whereas in America, in the Democratic Party, the Palestinians are now more popular than Israel, and particularly among young people. A little bit more popular among all Democrats, but much more popular among young people. And there's a very vocal pro-Palestinian small group of congressmen, mostly associated with what we call the Squad. The fact is that there's still no real fight from opponents of AIPAC. J Street puts up a good, they do their best, but they're no match for AIPAC. AIPAC has so much money and so much clout, and they've been staffing the congressional offices for a long time, and they staff the Department of Defense and State Department, and they cause so much trouble for anybody who opposes them that that they still run things as far as U.S. foreign policy goes. And Joe Biden, moreover, president, he's of the generation that still adheres to the mythical Israel that he grew up learning about, and he loved Golda Meir and Yitzhak Rabin, and his emotional commitment to the state of Israel is very powerful. So even though he can't possibly like Bibi Netanyahu or trust Bibi Netanyahu, he, like many American Jews, sees beyond Netanyahu to the state of Israel, which he associates with American values. And so he had no trouble in the beginning reacting, as many of us did, to the horror of the Gaza, the attack by the Hamas. Just want to make one thing clear about myself. I'm talking today as an analyst and as a historian. By the way, my PhD is in history, even though I'm a professor of English. But as a person, no matter what I say, when people talk about the Middle East, often what they say is taken out of context. I want to say two things that should go next to whatever else I say if you want to attack me. One is I don't think there's anything that could possibly justify the nature of the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th. And I also don't think there's anything that can justify Israel's reaction to the attack on Hamas in Gaza ever since. Those are both unjustifiable, no question, period. End of sentence. Okay, so the attack had an enormous emotional effect on supporters of Israel, not just Jews, but many supporters of Israel. And people had a sort of second Holocaust reaction, which is a reaction they've had a number of times since the Holocaust, when Israel was in danger. And so Biden, he did the politically astute thing as well as the emotionally true thing by embracing Israel 100%. That's proved to be a terrible problem for him because Netanyahu is in a very special situation where if he doesn't continue the war, there's a good chance his government will fall and he will go to jail because he's very corrupt and he's on trial at the moment. So he needs to continue this war indefinitely. And also the other people in his coalition who are keeping him afloat, the extreme right, the extreme theocrats, the people who want to expel the Palestinians from the West Bank and take it over, they also will lose their position in the government. So the people in the current government have every incentive to keep this war going and to not make any compromises and to hell with the hostages. That's their political incentive. And there's nothing that the United States can do about that. People have the idea on the left that the United States can force Israel to make peace with the Palestinians. It can't. Israel will do what it wants to do and tell the United States to get lost if it feels that's necessary. The United States can't control what Israel does. At the same time, Israel can't control what the United States does, except insofar as it relates directly to Israel. So if the United States if Barack Obama wanted to have an Iran agreement, he can have his Iran agreement because that's not about Israel. But it can't, there's no power strong enough to overcome the power of Israel and the United States to force Israel itself to do anything it doesn't want to do.
What about weapons sales, though?
It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. You know, in 2021, okay, so Barack Obama, who has a reputation among quote unquote, those are quotes, pro-Israel Americans as being not pro-Israel, being anti-Israel among the right, he signed an agreement which, as far as I know, is unprecedented in all of diplomatic history, to give Israel $38 billion worth of aid over the next 10 years. It's a law. It's passed by Congress. It can't be changed. So they're getting their money no matter what. So in 2021, Israel fought that little war in Gaza again. And they used up what they said was $1 billion worth of Iron Dome missiles, the missile system that the United States and Israel created together to shoot down other missiles. So Congress said, well, they had to use some of the money we gave them, so let's give them another $1 billion to make up for it. And so they had a vote in Congress about this, about giving them an additional $1 billion on top of the $38 billion, which was intentionally used for this purpose in the first place. And the vote, if you add up the House and Senate, was 528 to 8 with one abstention. AOC was the abstention, and she cried and felt bad about it. So for all of the mishigas that you hear about the Democratic Party being anti-Israel and people turning against Israel, it was 8 votes out of 538 votes. And today there might be a dozen tops, but there aren't going to be any look, the battle that recently happened in the most recent fight in Congress was when Bernie Sanders said we should enforce the law that every country has to follow with regard to arms sales, which is in terms of tracking how they're used. There's already a law, but Israel is exempt from the law in practice. And that went down with, I think, 11 votes. So just enforcing a law that's already on the books, 11 votes. To get to 51 votes and to have the president sign it, not going to happen in your mind lifetime.
I want to ask you about something you said. You said that Biden was the last Democratic president to hold the views on Israel that he holds.
I think that's true. I mean, I'm a historian, so I shouldn't make predictions. But in the 2020 Democratic primary, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders both supported putting conditions on aid to Israel with regard to human rights, because Israel was treating the Palestinians so terribly. It wasn't about weapons, it was about human rights. And both refused to speak to AIPAC's conference. Those two things are new. Now, is that the wave of the future, or is Israel going to be, or are the Democrats going to keep nominating people like Biden? Well, they're certainly going to nominate one person like Biden in 2024 because it's going to be Biden. Again, Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders will be too old to be nominated in 2024. That generation will be gone from politics. In the next generation, the center of a U.S. foreign policy, the center of the Democratic Party on Israel is still very much in that court. The Speaker of the House, Hakeem Jeffries, is very pro-Israel. And those people who are not, first of all, they're being picked off by AIPAC right now.
How so? I mean, their opponents are being flushed with money?
Since AIPAC was founded, they have pretended not to give candidates money. They had a kind of system where they would say, oh, we like this candidate. He's a great guy. And then the same people who were members of the board of AIPAC in their local communities would then form organizations that would then give money to the candidate. But AIPAC itself wouldn't give money to the campaign. Then J Street founded a PAC where it did start directly giving money to candidates who were liberal Zionists. They weren't anti-Israel, but they occasionally would not go along with the Israeli government, particularly if it was a Likud government. So AIPAC said, okay, what the hell? We will now form our own PAC. And that PAC has been enormously well funded, mostly by conservative Republicans. And the AIPAC takes that money from conservative Republicans and goes into Democratic primaries and tries to defeat those candidates that do not toe their line on Israel. And they spent a fortune. They spent $6 million in just one primary in 2022. And that was when they said they were spending about 30 million. People today say, I don't know how well sourced this is, but they're talking about $100 million in the 2024 Democratic primary. So, if I were a progressive Democrat, I would keep my mouth shut about Israel, because who needs that kind of trouble? If you want to do good on the issues that are important to your community, particularly if you represent poor people, why should taking on this organization that will defeat you if you say the wrong thing? I mean, a lot of the people they took on were people who were pro-Israel. They just weren't sufficiently pro-Israel for AIPAC. So that's always been AIPAC's strength, and now it's clearer. And it's also, I think AIPAC should get a lot more trouble in the media for this, but they don't. And we can talk about that. I sometimes end up sounding like an anti-Semite when I talk about AIPAC. But the head of AIPAC was asked, it's quoted in my book, is there anything a pro-Israel candidate could do to lose AIPAC support? And the head of the AIPAC said, I can't think of any. So that is, in fact, what people anti-Semites accuse of doing, of putting Israel's interests ahead of the United States. They're supporting insurrectionists. They're supporting people who are undermining American democracy because those people support Israel.
They support Republicans, right?
Yeah, including Republicans who deny the reality of Joe Biden's presidential election.
Right. And speaking of that, would you say something about evangelical Christian organizations' support of Israel?
Well, that's something that doesn't get talked about enough. The largest pro-Israel organizations is Christians United for Israel, led by a man who thinks Hitler was a warrior for God because he was helping to send Jews back to Israel because they couldn't live anywhere else, so that the book of Revelations could come into being and there would be a rapture and we'd all go to hell. All of us Jews would go to hell. That's the plan. The Republican Party, this is another reason why there will never be, in my lifetime, any restrictions on weapons to Israel. The Republican Party is 100% behind Israel and has nothing but contempt for the Palestinians. And they just don't care if they live or die, period. And I used to say, I think it's still true, that if Bibi Netanyahu, after Trump anyway, if Bibi Netanyahu had been born in the United States, he could run for president as a Republican, and they would nominate. They love that guy. So there will always be. You can't be a national Republican politician and oppose Israel. You won't get anywhere. It's a fundamental issue because of the power of the evangelicals in the Republican Party. You hear a lot more about these days about abortion, but Israel is just as important. It was one of the founding principles of Jerry Falwell's Compact with America, and it's based on the. I again was shocked when I read about the theological basis of it with regard to the rapture that is expected. But in any case, even if American Jews are about evenly divided between supporting everything Israel does or either not supporting it or opposing it. Whereas Christian evangelicals, or who the people who care about it, are not at all divided. And both Bibi Netanyahu privately and other Israeli right-wing politicians publicly have said, these American Jews are a pain in the ass. And we don't really need them because we have the Christians and the Republicans. And we can take care of them, and they don't give us any hassle.
So how will the Israel issue factor into the upcoming elections?
Sadly, in my opinion, it's going to help the Republicans a great deal. There's only really Michigan, I think, where it matters in terms of votes, because a lot of
Arab Americans.
Yeah, Arab Americans may withhold their votes. I think crazily, in my opinion, because Trump wants to deport Muslims. But they're so angry at Biden's position that they are having an emotional response, which I think is not sensible, and they're withholding their support for Biden, even though it may mean Trump's election. That they're saying that now. I hope they're not saying that in November. But anyway, there are numbers there where it could matter. Where it does matter, though, is that the activist base of the Democratic Party is very much pro-Palestinian now. The left of the Democratic Party is pro-Palestinian. And they cause a lot of trouble. They interrupt the president's rallies. They get arrested. They stop traffic. They're really dedicated to their view. And the only thing they can think to do, because again, they can't win politically, is disrupt things. So they do that. I mean, that's what they do on college campuses also. And so it gives the impression to people that of chaos, of things being out of control, of the Democrats being associated with people that normal Americans are uncomfortable with. And that's going to be very costly to the Democrats. And it'll make some people. Also, the other big support for Democrats is celebrities that they're associated with in public mind. And a lot of celebrities are pro-Palestinian. So they punch way above their weight in terms of the media and on the left and on college campuses, even though they don't represent a powerful force in politics itself. They give the impression of doing so, and that hurts the Democrats quite a bit.
But do you really think that like Black voters are going to throw away their vote on Cornell West, for instance?
I think graduate students and college students will, for sure.
Really?
Yeah. Well, and now, if it were today, now, Democrats need to do a better job of showing what a hellscape America will be if Trump if Trump wins again. They haven't done a good job of breaking to the media. The media are always, it's another one of my obsessions. The media are saying, well, on the one hand, Trump is a rapist and a criminal and a dictator and everything else. He's a con man and a pathological liar. But on the other hand, Biden's a little bit old and doesn't remember everything. Like they're both sides every single issue, even though they're not. There's no both sides. Trump wants to end American democracy, and he can do it if he's president. So the Democrats need to do a better job of explaining the threat of this cult that has taken over the Republican Party, and then maybe they can make more progress with people who are looking at Robert Kennedy and Cornel West. We've got some good news this week, which Manchin is not going to run, and that was a big worry if he had.
Right. Speaking of the media, don't you think that it's changed, not just since October 7th, but maybe November 7th or December 7th? I just, a recent New York Times magazine had a cover story on 1948. They never had that before.
It's been changing slowly for a long time. If you read my book, they have had things like that for quite a while. The media are still, and I say the media are rather than the media is. I recently had a fight with David Remnick about this, the editor of the New Yorker, because they had a big headline about Israel with the media. Because the media media is a plural noun, and it refers to lots of different media, and you can't really talk about them all at the same time. But there's no question that up and through the 1970s, up through, I would say, Sabra and Shatila in 1982, everything Israel did was right, and everything the Palestinians did was wrong, with the exception of the New York Times in the early 50s, which was very anti-Zionist. The owners of the New York Times were Jews who were anti-Israel, and that was kind of a funny situation, along with the State Department. Those were the two important anti-Israel organizations in America. But both of those eventually moved over to pro-Israel positions. And then with the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, things changed because a lot of the journalists who were covering the Middle East lived in Beirut. And when Israel did this siege of Beirut and was dropping bombs on the city and breaking, and then a few years later with the first Intifada, where they were breaking the bones as a policy of young people throwing rocks at them, this new Israel emerged in the eyes of the media, and things began to even out a bit over time. And now they're in the mainstream media, they're just about even, not exactly. I mean, Israelis are perceived to be white people, and Arabs are still perceived to be sort of other. But there's an effort, but there's no question that today the Palestinians are the victims and Israel is the stronger party. And the media like to be on the side of victims when they can. That's in the mainstream media. In the left-wing media, like The Nation, Israel is just the boogeyman, period. And in the right-wing media, the Palestinians are associated with terrorism still, and are dehumanized, much as they are in most of the Israeli media, with the exception of Haaretz and a journal called 972. So, so the media, I think, have changed gradually over time, and I think people are just starting to notice it now because the story's become so much more prominent everywhere. I mean, if you read The Nation, I used to complain to the editors of The Nation about their coverage of the Middle East because it never took Israel's interests into account. I was the only person at The Nation for 25 years who had any sympathy for Israel. But now it's as if it's a magazine published by people in Gaza. I mean, there's no sympathy for Israel at all, and half the magazine is about Gaza. That's typical of the left. It's typical of a lot of college students, on the attitudes of college students. The right is its mirror image, and the mainstream media, one day it's one thing, one day it's another thing, because you can't do both at once. It's impossible.
Mm-hmm. Could you talk, speaking of the left, could you say something? Do you think that groups like Jewish Voices for Peace have any more power than they did before, or are any more relevant than they were?
Zero power. No power on Jewish Voice for Peace, or if not now, or Students for Justice in Palestine. Their power is their ability to disrupt, and they use that power to shout down Israeli speakers, to harass people who are perceived to be pro-Israel, and unfortunately, they define people as pro-Israel if they wear a yarmulke or if they go to Hillel. That's where this problem can and occasionally does edge into anti-Semitism. But look, the Palestinians are living under worse conditions than they ever have after all this time. Nothing has worked for them. Terrorism didn't work. Negotiations didn't work. And BDS is a failure. So they're desperate, and the only power they have is the power to say, hey, we're still here. That's what October 7th was about. They were saying, you want to make peace with Saudi Arabia and forget about us? No, you're not going to be able to do that. And I think it was, again, nothing I would ever support. In fact, I can't even really deal with people who can support it. But it was a response to the consistent dehumanization by Israel of the people living in Gaza, saying you're not human and you don't deserve to be treated like human. And then it's okay, well, we're going to act like we're not human. And so the people who support Palestine have no power in the United States, except as editors of small magazines and professors in certain universities. What they have is the power to disrupt. And that's why I said that they're a problem for the Democratic Party, because that's what they're going to keep doing.
Okay, my last question before we turn it over to audience questions is about one of the main words in this conflict, Zionism. How is it weaponized, and how to what extent can people express, as you did, support for the existence of Israel without it turning into a right-wing sort of slogan?
Well, I think it's a very complicated question. I think the fact that we're still talking about Zionism is very unhelpful, because you can't, the people who say they are anti-Zionist, fine, you can be anti-Zionist in a philosophical way. My daughter and I were talking about it when she was in college, and she said it's a good question for a seminar room, but it's not a political question, because there is no way for these people to get rid of Israel. There isn't going to be a one state from the river to the sea. There isn't good. I actually personally don't think there can be a two-state solution anymore. I'm very pessimistic about the whole thing. But there is an Israel, and there is an occupation, and there is discrimination against 20% of Israelis who are not Jewish. And I would like to see people be practical about improving the lives of those people whose lives suck, who live in a situation that none of us American Jews or Canadian Jews would ever accept. And that means dealing with the reality on the ground and dealing with the fears. The only way that the Palestinians can have a state or run their own lives is if the stronger power, the power that has defeated them in now 15 wars and has just killed over 1 out of every 100 people in Gaza, is for the Israelis to trust the Palestinians that they will be safe if there's a Palestinian entity of whatever kind. But the Palestinians are so understandably angry and furious at the way they've been treated, and they have no real tradition of nonviolent resistance, that they are not going to, they're not interested in proving that. Their support for Hamas now is higher than it was before October 7th, as far as we understand it. So it's a terrible situation. And talking in this fantastic way about whether or not Zionism is a good thing or not is silly. For a while, I called myself an anti-Zionist because I just think it's dumb to talk about Zionism that way. Today, I call myself a post-Zionist. I used to be a liberal Zionist when I thought there was a two-state solution, but I think Israel has destroyed that possibility. And so have the Palestinians, but I blame Israel more because they get everything and the Palestinians get nothing. But today I'm a post-Zionist because Zionism is a settled question, and the question is how are these two peoples going to live together? And it's not going to be with the end of the state of Israel. Whatever you think of whether or not there should be one or not, I don't really care what you think. I care about how we can improve the reality on the ground for the people whose lives are on the line.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been really enlightening, and I hope everybody will buy your book. And I'm going to turn it over to Gabriella.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jacqueline, for getting the ball rolling with questions. And we do have some audience questions now. I just want to tell the audience too that Eric Alterman has generously agreed to stay till 2:15. so we'll get to as many questions as we can. And I'm going to do them pretty much in order of their appearance. So we have one from Wolf Ehrlichman, who asks, in a two-state solution, will the Palestinian state be demilitarized? So it's a question not exactly for an American academic to answer, but what is your expectation?
So I don't expect a two-state solution. If there were to be a two-state solution, it would have to be demilitarized. The proposal that Tony Blinken and the Biden administration are working on now is a proposal that would include U.S. recognition of a demilitarized Palestinian state. So yes, if there were such a solution, it would involve a demilitarized Palestinian state. But there's no simple, what I just said earlier, and I'm not criticizing your question because I'm sure you asked it before I said this, is that the only way there can be a Palestinian state is if Israel agrees to one. And Israel is not going to agree to one for a very long time. And there's nothing anybody can do about it.
Okay, that's somewhat disheartening to hear since we are dedicated to promoting a two-state solution.
Well, you've got a very long road ahead of
you. Okay. I have a follow-up question of my own, but I want to do the audience ones first. So we have a long one from Janet Ginsburg-Cohen, and I will actually read the whole thing out because it's she says, I don't feel lied to. Is it untrue that the IDF tries to warn Palestinian civilians about impending ground assaults? If true, I don't know if the armies of other countries do this. Am I too naive in feeling strongly that we don't really have the right to suggest a path to peace when we live in the US, Canada, and not in Israel? I think that's the gist of her question.
Well, Israel's behavior vis-a-vis the civilians of Gaza, I think, is morally indefensible. They warn and they don't warn. They warn, and then they do it. They say to people, you have to leave, but the people have nowhere to go. And the question is if you look at the way Israel is treating the civilians of Gaza, the IDF is. The question is, are they killing civilians on purpose as a message, or are they just totally unconcerned with how many people they kill because they feel like they have the right to not care because of what Hamas did on October 7th, and they want to get Hamas guys, and it's tough luck on anybody who's in the way of that. Those are the only two positions I see. I read a report. There's an interview with a doctor who just came back from Palestine, and he said he was treating children with single bullets in their head, in their skulls that were shot, by snipers. And I think that's true. I mean, I think there's a sense of a complete lack of discipline on the part of Israeli soldiers on how they treat civilians in Gaza right now. I could talk about, that's my sense from reading the media. I can talk more knowledgeably about historical battles than this one because I don't trust everything I read in the media. But there's too much of it to dismiss as propaganda. As for do we have the right to criticize Israel? Israelis have said that ever since they were founded. If put yourselves on the line if you want to criticize what we do. Come move to Israel. I think in the United States, we have every right because we're funding what they're doing. It's American taxpayer money. And I think everyone has the right to criticize anyone else. I think it's nonsense to say we don't have the right. Did we have the right to criticize South Africans for what they were doing during apartheid? It's nuts. So I think that's a form of intimidation on the part of Israelis, of diaspora Jews. I think diaspora Jews need to rethink their relationship to the state of Israel. I think in the United States, I can't speak to Canada, although there is some Canada in the book, but I don't profess to know much about it. But beginning in 1967, if you leave aside the ultra-Orthodox, which are about 10% of American Jews, of U.S. Jews, the vast majority of American Jews just transferred their Jewish identity to Zionism, to being supportive of Israel, and they really didn't figure out what it meant to be a Jew other than to support Israel. And the people who run these organizations, most of them are not religious at all. A lot of them are married to Christians, and I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying they're not consistent with the precepts of religious Jews. At the ADL, I quote a guy who was there for 25 years, head of their anti-Semitism efforts, and he said nobody cared if you were Jewish or adhered to any Jewish holidays. What they cared about is that you marched in the Israel Day Parade at the ADL. I think now that Israel is no longer able to sustain American Jewry because it's not the country that people thought it was, and also because our lives are so different than the life of the Israelis. The Israelis are all fighting a war right now. We're fine. I'm not worried that my daughter is going to die in a war. So I think diaspora Jews need to reimagine what it means to be Jewish and not define it by virtue of their Zionism. I have no problem with people like American Friends of Shalom Akshab caring deeply about Israel. I just think that it's not a substitute for what it means to be a Jew.
Okay. Thank you. Here's a question from an anonymous attendee. Is it possible to be both pro-Israel and pro-Palestine in support of the moderates on both sides? And that presumes there are moderates on both sides. So I guess please address both aspects of that. Are there moderates on both sides? And how do we support them?
Well, the position I always associated myself with was what I read, the editorials and most of the column that's in Haaretz, which is, by the way, the single best source of what's going on in Israel and with the Palestinians in the world. So in Israel, Haaretz has a subscription of about 6% of the newspaper market. Haaretz, if you read the great Israeli novelist Amos Oz, Aleph Ben Yehoshua, the poet Yehuda Amichai, David Grossman, the guys who used to sign op-ed saying, don't support Likud, support the peace movement, support Shalom Akshab. The Israel that liberal Americans, which is most Jews, liberal Jews, which is most Jews, grew up idolizing, a tiny group of people at the moment. They couldn't. That's why we have such a right-wing government in Israel, because they couldn't get together and get enough votes to even be in the parliament. There's like 4 of them in the whole parliament there. So there are a few moderates in Israel. They're very vocal. They're very well educated. I imagine. I mean, I was afraid. I expected that if the Netanyahu government was able to push through its legislative agenda, those would be the people who would lead. They're the best educated, and they're the most dedicated to the principles of the Enlightenment and of democracy. And Israel was turning its back on that. As for the Palestinians, well, the moderates they don't have anything to show for their efforts. The Palestinian Authority is completely corrupt. It has no legitimacy because it's seen as the enforcer of Israel, the collaborator of the Israelis who treat the Palestinians so badly and don't pay any price for it. So, and they haven't had elections in 15 years, 16 years, and they were going to have elections and they were canceled. people who opposed them were jailed. So no. If you want to support both Israel and the Palestinians, then you would support somehow forcing Israel to treat the Palestinians better than they do. And I actually don't know how to do that. Because again, the only way to do that would be through American Jewish organizations and the US government. And as I said, that's a very long-term process. I'm all in favor of people who have the patience and the dedication, and it's really the only way. But it's kind of like if you were an opponent of slavery in the 1820s, you would be doing the right thing, but you couldn't imagine exactly how it was going to succeed. And it ended up succeeding with the Civil War.
Okay. So
I'm a very depressing person. I'm sorry.
So as often happens, we receive a lot of questions sort of in the last minute. So I'm going to let's try to get it to as many as possible. So you answer as you wish, Eric, but just keep that in mind if you could make the answer.
It's not my fault everything's so damn complicated. Okay, that's why I wrote a 500-page book.
Okay. So Aaron Rosenberg asks, does Bibi prioritize the hostages, or has he considered them a price that he may have to pay to destroy Hamas?
Well, I think he considers them a price he is perfectly willing to pay to stay in power. It's impossible to destroy Hamas. I'm all in favor of destroying Hamas, but it's impossible. They're like fish in the sea, They have the support of the public. They've been building their infrastructure for decades with the support of Bibi Netanyahu, who saw them as a means of preventing a Palestinian state and weakening the Palestinian Authority. And a lot of the leaders have already escaped to Qatar and other places. You can't do it. And also, you can't run Gaza or the West Bank without them. So saying you're going to fight the war until you destroy Hamas is saying, I don't care about the hostages, and there's never going to be peace here. And the Israeli economy will suffer as well, and people will leave because it'll be a much less pleasant place to live. See, one thing that's kept this conflict simmering for the past few decades is Israel has been a wonderful place to live. Since they built the wall in the West Bank, they've had very little terrorism. I was in Tel Aviv last year. It was like being in Barcelona. It was fantastic, except that there was this horrible occupation going on a few miles away. So now that period of history is over. And the Israelis are saying, they mostly agree with Bibi on this. They're saying, we can't live with Hamas, but you also can't destroy Hamas. You can destroy yourselves in the process of trying to destroy Hamas, but you can't destroy Hamas. So at some point, the Israelis are going to have to accept that fact. Now, Netanyahu has this very special reason for refusing to accept that fact, which is that his government will fall once there's another election, and he will be vulnerable to going to jail. He's been trying to pass a law saying you can't send a prime minister to jail, and that is now on hold. That was one of the things that the Supreme Court was going to rule on before the war. So I don't think he cares about anything so much as he cares about Bibi Netanyahu, and if that means the hostages, at least half of whom are probably already dead, are not going to be saved, well, he's got the support for that in his government. In fact, the right wingers in his government say, if there's a hostage deal, we will bring down the government. So the people in the Netanyahu government are theocrats and extreme nationalists. It's kind of like what a Trump government would look like. They're not Democrats. They want to expel the Palestinians from the West Bank and take it over. They want to force as many Palestinians to leave as they can. They want to make Israel as theocratic as possible and destroy its remaining democratic practices. And Netanyahu has thrown in with them because those are the only people who will support him. So it's a terrible situation.
Right. Yeah, I have to agree. So a question from Barbara Landau, and that is about civil society initiatives? How can they help in the situation and in international funding to them? Can that help build some hope and practical results?
Yeah, well, yes. I mean, I'm glad you asked that question. There's two reasons why I support them and why the Netanyahu government has put them under attack and try to prevent their sustenance by taxing them. They tax the ones that the Jewish organization that are run by Jews, and they send police raids. Well, Bennett did this too, send police raids to the ones that are run by Arabs, and arresting people and destroying their documents and so forth. But there's two reasons to support them. One is because of the word hope, which you just said. They are giving people some hope. They are helping the people who need help in a small way, and they are saying to other people, "Don't give up. We're here. You're not all alone." Particularly to the Palestinians who are holding out hope that one day they can live in peace with Israel. Second reason is that that great speech that Bobby Kennedy gave in South Africa, where he said, but that this kind of activism are stones that create tiny ripples in the sea that can become a tidal wave of justice. I forget exactly the phrase, but we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Something could change that we can't predict. Usually it's changed for the worse, in my opinion, but I do know that we can't predict the future. And it's important to be ready for it. So these civil organizations, like if you look at what happened in Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel's in jail one day and he's the prime minister the next day. The future is unwritten. And these are the organizations that are going to sustain people for the next crisis. And who knows, maybe that crisis will break in a helpful way.
Okay, thanks. I'm going to skip ahead to one question from Akash Maharaj, excuse me. I think it's an important question. If you do not believe in a two-state solution, if you don't believe it's feasible, what do you think is a feasible option for peace? And I'm going to tack on my own addition to this. There's been a lot of more international interest in the two-state solution, especially from the Biden administration. And is that at all hopeful, or is it just the window dressing?
Well, it's not window dressing. I know Tony Blinken pretty well. We used to be friends when we were young. He's not stupid, and he's not particularly idealistic, and he doesn't do anything that Biden doesn't want him to do. He's not Dean Acheson. He's Joe Biden's man, and he's putting a lot of effort into this. And Tom Friedman, who's the most influential writer in the Middle East in the United States, is also totally into this idea that there can be this grand bargain between Israel and the United States and Saudi Arabia that would include important steps towards a two-state solution, including the promise of the United States to recognize the state of Palestine once certain conditions were met by its leadership. The thing is that in order for that to succeed, you have to overthrow the government of Israel, current government of Israel. It's impossible that could happen under Netanyahu. You'd have to say to Israelis, trust us, we're going to deliver to you a safe Palestinian state. In exchange, you're going to have a great role in the Middle East and you won't be isolated anymore, and it's a good deal for you. And it would mean the Israelis trusting the United States to make sure that they're safe from the Palestinians. Now, after October 7th, that's a tough job. If your guess is as good as mine, if the Israelis would say, okay, we're going to give you a government that will cooperate with you on this, and that government will succeed against all its opponents, including Netanyahu, in allowing you to create a Palestinian state, even though that Yitzhak Rabin never agreed to a Palestinian state. Oslo does not include the promise of a Palestinian, and he was assassinated. There would be lots of, even if an Israeli prime minister agreed to the creation of a Palestinian state, there would be lots of terrorism, Jewish terrorism against that prime minister. There would be lots of Palestinian terrorism against the Jews because the Palestinians would be having to make a historic compromise as well. And we just saw what happened on October 7th was that horror was supported by the vast majority of Palestinians as far as we understand. So I'm hoping that Tony and his advisors, Jake Sullivan, know stuff I don't know about why this is worth their time and effort. John Kerry put a lot of time and effort into this under Barack Obama. That was completely fruitless. I didn't understand what he thought he was doing. For some reason, American secretaries of state are willing to risk a lot for Middle East peace, even when the chances are extremely dim. So maybe one day they'll be able to pull it off. If you look at my history, no, it's not encouraging. Sorry about that.
So just to be clear, because Akash was asking if you have a different option for peace, but I think what you're saying is you don't think that the two-state solution is going to happen anytime soon. That doesn't mean that it's not a good solution if it could happen.
That'd be wonderful. The only reason I don't call myself a liberal Zionist anymore is because I don't think the two-state solution is on the table anymore. I could be wrong about that. Like I said, Tony Blinken, smart guy, went to Harvard Law School, maybe smarter than I am, certainly knows more than I do. I could be wrong about this. But there isn't a one-state solution. I mean, right now, what we have is Israel's one-state solution. There is a power from the river to the sea. It's called Israel. And it's not like Israel is like interested in making life any easier or nicer for the Palestinians, no matter where they live, whether they live in Israel, whether they live in the West Bank, or they live in Gaza. So in order for things to change, there has to be a fundamental, the train in Israel is running in one direction. And since October 7th, it's speeded up, okay? It's running in the wrong direction now for peace. Now, if you want to have peace, you have to turn that train around and have it run in the opposite direction that it's running now. That's the fundamental precondition for peace. How are you going to do that? Explain to me how you're going to do that, and I'll support it. But if just tell me that it should happen, well, a lot of things should happen that are never going to happen.
Thanks. So I think we're just going to have time for one or maybe three more questions at the most. From Elizabeth Block, the mainstream Jewish community has supported Israel unconditionally for decades. Now when people blame all Jews for what Israel's doing, they cry anti-Semitism. Are they, in fact, and by they, I assume she means mainstream Jewish organizations, increasing anti-Semitism? So do you blame mainstream Jewish organizations for the rise in anti-Semitism we're seeing now?
Well, let me put it this way. The first part of her statement is true, that American Jews, except for the anti-Zionists, like the extreme Orthodox anti-Zionists, and also Jewish Voice for Peace, etc., but 80 to 90% of American Jews have said, we are Zionists. We support the state of Israel. That's the fundamental basis of our identity. In fact, the Reform movement, which was anti-Zionist before the state of Israel was created, officially said we're now part of the Zionist movement. So you're asking a lot of people who feel themselves to be either victims of Israel or champions of the victims of Israel to separate American Jews from supporters of Israel, because they say they're supporters of Israel. And so they attack them as supporters of Israel, and then the American Jewish organizations say that's anti-Semitism. They say that one day, but the other day they say we are exactly what they're accusing us of being. So there's like this parsing of the language there. There are good ways, there are ways that are okay to attack supporters of Israel in ways that are not. And it just seems to me to be an awful, again, a lot of distinctions without a difference. The fundamental difference between the way we think about Israel and the safety of the diaspora and the way we have thought about them is that, look, Israel was founded as a refuge for Jews, no question about that. There were 250,000 European Jews living in functional concentration camps at the end of World War II, after Germany was defeated, and no country would take them, including particularly the United States. So the state of Israel was created so that Jews would have somewhere to go. People didn't, people said the Holocaust is the logical culmination of centuries of oppression by Christians and Muslims, and Jews need to take a hold of their own history and be a refuge. And that's why the law of return was created. Today, Israel is endangering Jews outside of Israel. They're